All right. Well, we are quasi beginning episode 11 of, and also we are already deep into a conversation about other things, our Eurovision and otherwise, middle names and otherwise. But we're transitioning now to all those who are listening and can imagine a conversation about Eurovision and middle names, to where Kirk and I are now going to talk about Genesis, the Old Testament, and probably more specifically Joseph. I would imagine, because we can kind of walk around anywhere, but Joseph was last week, so we can at least start there and go from there. So we talked about Joseph, part one, and then we don't know what part two is going to be like. But part one, it was hard to figure out where to stop, and hard to figure out what to include and not to include. Because there's so you could do a whole 10-week series on Joseph. There's just so much. There's so much stuff. So it's hard to know where to stop, hard to know what to include, not to include. But anyway, as you listened on Sunday, what did you think?
It was interesting. I mean, Joseph is an amazing character anyway, right? Just unsinkable is a good way to put a title on him, because he is just like a buoy, man. The guy is, no matter what happens, just keep on trucking. Just
That's a great word, unsinkable.
Yeah, he's just everything happens to this guy, and he's so super positive, and he's just. I'm always curious, like, if he was the irritatingly positive guy in the room, and everyone was like, there he is again. All right, already.
Here comes that dreamer again.
Yeah. We got sheep to take care of. We got goats to take care of. Another talk about dreams. Come on. Like, that's just really funny to me, because his older brothers, who don't look at him as like, hey, little baby brother. No, they're like, oh, he's going to talk again. They can't take it. They can't take it so much that, again, the world is probably only housing maybe 500,000 people, 1 million people at this time in history. And they're like, let's kill one. let's
kill our brother.
Let's kill our brother. And what have you done? What could he have possibly done to irritate them to that point? That fascinates me.
That those are their decisions before them. What should we do? We could ignore him.
Yeah.
Or kill him and shove him in a pit.
Also, the other part that's great about that particular opening dialogue in that chapter is it includes asking for directions, which I thought was really a funny inclusion. So Genesis, right, the whole book was a word of mouth storytelling until written down, right? So until this point, somebody has to tell the story repeatedly that Joseph was sent by his dad to find his brothers and give report about how they're doing, and he can't find them and has to ask a stranger for directions, who coincidentally overheard them. How? How loud are they? Or how close was he? That's just weird. I just love that that's an inclusion, that he's wandering around. And it's during that wandering around that the brothers make their decision, because they can see him, which means true. That he also should have seen them. But, who am I? So it's a funny plot point there that they include him asking directions. But off he goes and to report on his brothers, which amazing. It's just I just love that whole setup, because what has he been doing until this point? Because he's the youngest. It's typically the youngest kid who's out, taking care of the sheep, right? The older brothers have moved on to get married, start their own lives, do whatever.
Look at David and Jesse's life. You're right. David is taking care of the sheep, and the older brothers are not.
I mean, that's the role that keeps getting passed down, right?
And so it's funny that he's
not. Home. Yeah, he's home in his fancy cloak. His brothers are out. Tending the sheep and the goats, and Dad sends him off. Now, in my head at this point, I'm picturing him skipping to to go find his brothers because he's just so happy.
How could you not? What else would Joseph do?
I don't, I'm sure that's not canonical, but I can't not picture it. It's just too funny to me. But yeah, there he goes to find his brothers, and the first thing they do is choose to get rid of him because it's just how much more of his talk about his dreams can they take? It's unbearable. All this talk about sheaves of wheat, like really, that's the worst that they. That was the straw that broke the camel's back.
I never thought about the idea that you just said about that. You're right. He would have normally been tending the sheep, and maybe that plays into some because it says they were jealous. So maybe that plays into it that they were, that the jealousy wasn't only on his, because he is overtly positive, like all the way throughout. I'm amazed if you just read all the things that he says. That's all you read. You'll go through it's like, oh, like, and at the end, which I didn't touch on Sunday on purpose, he's like, well, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. We're good.
Yep.
It's like that. Like that's the end of the
all part of the plan.
Yeah. It's so like all the way through. He just tracks. You're right. He tracks overtly positive. But I do wonder if how much of that I've never thought about that whole jealousy thing, which you read, but then he would for some reason he wasn't tending the sheep, but he normally, as far as family culture is concerned, he normally would have been tending the sheep. So what's the deal? I don't know if I said this in the second service that was streamed, but I know I said it in the first. Was it says like they throw him in the pit, Reuben has an issue, and then it says, and then they went to eat. It's like
they're just hanging out having lunch.
It's like oh, are you guys hungry? I'm hungry. I could eat.
And then from down in the cistern, hey guys, can I have a sandwich? I'm kind of hungry now. I think I twisted my ankle when you threw me in. Like what in the world?
Yeah.
Just where they couldn't hear him.
I know. Yeah.
And like this cistern, is it simply a hole? Because some of them are, right, where it's simply a hole where water collects, like rainwater collects, or is it one where there were stairs that led into it? Because like up on Masada, if you ever get to Masada, there's a cistern on top of it that on the surface of the mountain, basically, there's just a hole in the ground, and that collects the rainwater when it rains, which is rare. And then there's a small set of stairs, and when I say small, I mean like if you have a size 7 men's shoe or larger, your foot does not fit on this stair. Like it's a small set of stairs, but you can get in and out, so you can go down to get the water at the bottom. So I'm curious, was there a staircase to this cistern? Is it a hand dug cistern? Who knows? It's a hole in the ground. They threw him in, and somehow after throwing him in, they got him back out to sell to the Midianites.
Yeah,
but like, how did that work? They didn't talk about how to get him back out. I guess maybe he came up the stairs, or maybe.
Hey, come on now, guys.
Yeah,
guys.
Yeah. Come on out. Oh, and these are your new friends. Our distant cousins, the Midianites. That's interesting. That part is that part's actually very interesting too, when you consider that they're sons of Ishmael, right? Descendants of Ishmael, and they've done very well for themselves to the point where they have spices and things to trade.
They're trading,
with the Egyptians, the big civilization at the time. So they're able to gather up resources where they're located that are worthy of trade with the Egyptians, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah,
because that's not really what happened to their arc of the story, right? The story that we follow for Israel, they're not trading goods with Egypt. They end up trading themselves to Egypt, right? Which is very different
than the Midianites trading goods.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
But interesting and weird. But yeah, it's just I just love. He's so positive that I don't know if you've ever seen the show 30 Rock, and I'm probably.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 30 Rock. Yeah.
There's the guy who works, I think, in security. Who's
Jack Breyer.
Yeah. He's just super positive all the time. Like every role he plays, he's just super positive.
Or Jack McBrayer. Yeah.
Just like that. Like that.
I will never see Joseph the same again.
Brothers, gather round. I got some great news. And they're like, you can hear the eye roll. Just, you know what? Let's just say he got eaten by something. Can't we just do that? He got eaten by something.
You know what the better option to listening to you again is? That we throw you in a pit and pretend that you got eaten by something.
So his family, you figure, right? All his brothers and sisters, because there are sisters mentioned when the grief happens, right? Of the loss of Joseph. But all his brothers and sisters are raised the same, one would suspect.
Yeah.
But only him. He's the only one who's like, yay, all the time. And everybody else is Debbie Downer.
Skipping through.
Yeah. Let's see what my brothers are. But it's, they mentioned also that the brothers were irritated because he had given bad reports about them before that.
Oh, so he's a tattletale. He's
kind of a tattletale, which might be why when he's sent out to report on how they're doing, again, they're like, that's it. This is the last straw. And off he goes, off to Egypt. And it's interesting that that's where he gets sold to. And he's being carted around by these Midianite traders. So we don't know the conditions of his travel. But apparently they need to keep him in shape enough to be worthy of being bought and sold, right?
By the captain of the guard.
By the captain of the guard, not nobody. Yeah. This is like up there, right? So he was worth that right away, which is interesting that they even had access to selling him to that high a level. So these Midianite traders must have been pretty good at what they were doing, or he proved his worth to them along the way, and they said, this guy will be, head servant in somebody's house. And yeah, that worked out okay at first. But again, off to prison, and super positive in prison.
You wonder if Joseph, at any point thinks like, why does it like again? He just he rises to the top, and then he gets dumped into a pit, rises to the top, gets thrown in jail, gets forgotten about, rises, I'm like is at what point is he aware of oh, really?
Yeah. But go through this again? Even while sitting twiddling his thumbs, I'm sure he was doing some cleaning and making jokes with the guards and hanging out. It doesn't sound like it was. I can't imagine an Egyptian prison being very great to be hanging out in, but it was the equivalent of the Fed prison for people who have done naughty things and shouldn't be should be punished, but it's the country club prison because you have all
the
these
baker in the wine
taster, right? These are all the folks who have serving roles in the government.
True, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess even Joseph would have been he would have come from the oh, that's interesting. I wonder.
And so you get to hang out with these people who are around people of influence. Right. These are the people who support those people of influence. How long can you exist without the baker?
Right.
How hungry do you
want to be? Or the
wine
taster.
Right. Or the wine taster. Yeah. Every day's a risk now. So these guys get their jobs back pretty soon. And then so Joseph is just still hanging out. But in the meantime, the fact that he made an impression on those guys with whom he was cellmates.
Mm.
And that's who brings him up again. And that's the power of connection. Right. But
well, yeah. I mean, there's something about, and it says, it says that whatever in Potiphar's house, at least it says whatever Joseph did, the Lord was with him. And then
yeah,
Potiphar noticed, which Potiphar wouldn't have we don't know whether or not he would have known of the God, Yahweh. We don't know that he would have
right.
known, he would have been under obviously a completely different system, religious system. So something set Joseph apart. And then even in the jail, something like, did they just think like, well, Yahweh is just like, as a distinction from their kind of polytheism, Yahweh's just, oh, there's another God, and he's just, somebody that we don't know about yet, or did they recognize in Joseph's life, because of the way he lived, that okay, this is something else entirely? We've not like,
So that's actually, I'm always curious about that point in history, because, and there must have been more. People must know. Many more people than me who studied this a long, long time have to know. So Abraham follows God faithfully, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. So this tradition of who God is was passed down. So Esau's descendants have to know. What happens with that, we lose
yeah,
track of. Right? They had to have known. Ishmael had to have known. And then we end up later on with Islam, right?
right, yeah,
So they had to kind of know. There had to be at least talk
right.
outside of Egypt.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Headed this way, if you go east and north, you're going to bump into people who believe this.
I see. Yeah. So it's not, you're saying it's not just isolated to at that point, in Joseph's point, the Israelites.
Right. Which at that point was a small tribe.
That's true. Yeah.
So, I mean, we consider it, these are the people who bear the name and the law, but at the same, as they exit, right?
Right.
But before that, people must have known or had a rough idea, just simply by oral tradition.
Yeah.
But I know that other gods mixed in, but yeah, that's interesting. It had to be.
And that, I mean, there's a whole, the whole cultural piece with that, connected to the oral tradition. So, whatever, so writing was invented 7,000 years ago, something like that, whatever it was, but it was about that time. And so obviously, even when writing was first formed around that time, it wasn't like they're like, oh, we have this great new technology, let's write everything down. Who knows how long it took for the thing that for in Joseph's life, or even back through Genesis, to actually, like you said, the oral culture to actually be written down. We don't know how long that took. So if you don't have a document where two parties can look at and agree to, you just have these oral traditions. As you're traveling around, you're hearing stories about this one God, this monotheistic religion, this God Yahweh, the Lord, but you're kind of entrenched in this polytheistic, whether it's Egypt or otherwise, is some form of polytheism. So you're not looking at documentation, you're just hearing. And as they travel, yeah, maybe they're hearing about this God of Israel, this God of Ishmael, this God of Esau, but that's kind of the beginning and the end of it. At that time, it's the beginning and the end, because they only have this oral tradition until they.
So people who were traders and people who are sheep and goat herders wandering through the areas, they had to know the story of what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, because that was supposed to be a really beautiful valley, right?
That's true.
So that story had to have been passed around. It had to have, right?
Yeah.
How could it not?
Yeah.
What happened in this place? So that's interesting. So there had to be some understanding of, but rejection of.
Both
maybe.
ends. Yeah. Well, because you do have, like, like even the flood story, you have flood stories all over. Flood story is not
Yeah.
just in the Bible, it's everywhere. It's in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And there's other things too where you read them and not extra biblical, but other than biblical, anything that's not in the Bible, but just it's and there's some similarities to it, and I know you could not you, but the kind of unspecific you could make a case for, well, if it's in over there and it's in the Bible, and the Bible just copied it. I'm like, well, that could be true, but the reality is, like, because there's an oral culture, you're right. They're just trading, and they're traveling and trading and swapping stories, and so they hear things and they observe things, and until the things get kind of written down as the story of a specific people group, that's it's you don't really know. So it's actually it would actually be less corroborated if the Bible only the only place you heard about the flood or Sodom and Gomorrah was in the Bible, because you would if it was truly kind of enculturated, you'd hear about it in other places as well. And the fact that you do, to me, supports a biblical claim. It's actually really encouraging. So even here, but I'm not often in the frame of mind where I'm thinking about the Bible as an oral tradition before it became a written tradition, because that's all, when you think of the Bible, that's all you think about is the written part, but you don't realize that for generations it had to have been, for all of the
Genesis and
actual
Exodus.
parts of Genesis, it was all oral. It's none of that. It's not like Abraham was like, oh, so here I was in Ur, and this
Abraham's
happened.
log, day 700.
Yeah,
right. No, that didn't happen. Yeah, just hanging out,
right,
walking around.
And these stories get
excited to get visitors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just that even loops back to what you said about the asking for directions. The one as I've been reading Genesis, I'm more and more interested in what the Bible includes and then also doesn't include. Right. So why, like, there's this great quote by Henrik Ibsen, the playwright, and he talks about, he says, if there's a gun on the mantle in a play in the first act, he said it better go off by the third act. So kind of meaning, like, whatever you use early on, like, you can't there can't be like these spare things that don't get used. It all has to be part of the story. So I think about that. Actually, I think about that quote a lot. Even in the Bible, like, okay, why was this included? Why were those directions? That seems kind of superfluous. Like, why was that?
Yeah. Who added that
part?
Like,
what? Because obviously you're right. That would have gotten passed down, and you would think that over time some of the less necessary things would maybe get kind of skipped over. But that was apparently necessary enough to continue being communicated. So at the end of the day, what we have is a story about a guy asking directions and ending up in a pit, but then ascending.
Asking for directions and ending up in Egypt. Oops. Well, yeah.
Maybe I should have gone a different way.
Yeah, but things turned out okay.
Yeah.
Had a wife and kids, was in charge of the whole country.
Yeah, he doesn't seem too put off by the whole. I mean, this is toward the end of his life when he's in the in the palace, but
yeah,
so he's like, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. I work, like.
Gotcha. Well, I love that part of the whole story too.
I mean, like, I don't.
Where he gets to prank his family.
That's, I know.
That's another beautiful part.
I know, and again, I couldn't cover it, but that's the cup in the bin. I mean, it's almost like it's just classics. It's like, why did you feel like you needed to do that? You just wanted to, like, get him? Like, what? It's just this fantastic.
Got his brothers, and then got his father to come down as part of the prank, which is that's also amazing. That talk about orchestration.
Yeah,
you got to hike all the way back to Hebron from Egypt and all the way back down with your aged dad. Oh, he's my dad. Right. So that's amazing. Yeah, he's got you guys. Wow. That part is amazing. But
and that's even kind of like how he's an administrator. That's what he does. So it's like, that orchestration of that kind of prank and then getting his dad back. I mean, it makes sense that that's how we do it.
He had time to think. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. True. What else did he do in jail?
But he couldn't have known he was going to have that kind of influence again. But I'm sure he saw an opportunity. He's like, Oh yeah, here we go. Get everyone back together again. Won't they be happy? Oh, and then Exodus. Yeah, right.
But
But before that, we're alive and
and
not
happy.
starving.
And
Yeah,
then Exodus.
but it's interesting that Pharaoh is not is not irritated by his positivity, but respects his interpretation of dreams. The fact that he was used to interpret the dream of Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh, in such a way that they saved the known world in that area. Right? They were able to set apart food aid
Yeah.
and prepare
Yeah.
for
Obviously, the
all
Pharaoh
that time.
saw
That's
something.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible to store 7 years worth of grain up front. And I'm sure everyone's like, what are we doing? We've got plenty of grain. Like on year 4, they're like, what are we doing? This is like stacks of stuff, just mice everywhere eating this thing. All right. So yeah, I'm sure they were like, what are we doing? And then year 8, wow, that was a really great idea. Boy,
Yeah.
whew, good thing he was in charge. Yeah. So how did that go? Like the people carting all this grain for storage. That's amazing.
Well, and especially in times when, resources probably even in non-drought years probably weren't super abundant. I mean, it's not, I mean, apparently abundant enough to save up 7 years of grain, but, it's not like they had overflow going to be able to be like, oh yeah, we can just dump this because this will never get used anyway. We can save this,
Yeah.
it's
just
so
incredible.
yeah. So there's this balance, right? Joseph's life of this kind of mysticism of interpreting dreams. Only God, he says, only God can interpret, but God uses him to. So there's this kind of mystic element, but then there's this like logistical, practical element of like, oh, here's what the dream means, and here's what we should do.
Yeah.
Like this both and going for him, which is why he continues to ascend. Like he can see things, but then he can act on those things as well. So.
Well, that's the interpretation part, right? So it's not just some image, some weird could mean this, could mean that image. This image means this.
Right.
And
and you can act from that.
And we will do this in order to, that's a warning to say this, or this is about to happen. I mean, to be that clear about it, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that you're right. That does kind of lead to a pretty clean application. Here's what we really need to do because we know this is actually coming.
And then it makes you wonder, like, how many of the weird dreams that everyone has meant something that we've missed. Like, wow, what was that dream about swimming through Jello about? Who knows?
I was thinking about the dream. Actually, I was thinking about that. Like, there's so much and not only Joseph in Genesis, but Daniel. There's all sorts of visions and dreams I guess was just an accepted part. So much so that they're having dreams and they're like, hey, what does this mean? What does this mean? Where that there's so were the dreams different? Like where can you tell the difference between a dream where it's like, okay, God's trying to issue a warning, or were they more aware, or what? Like the dream culture seemed to be very much a part of their lives, whereas now it's all it's. Again, I don't know to always do with that. I mean, and again, depending on your background, your Christian background, dreams could mean a lot, or they could just mean, I'm swimming through Jello because I eat Jello for dessert, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like how do you navigate that? Because it was obviously very important then in Genesis, or as Joseph.
I think in a lot of cultures that's true. That was always true. That dreams were significant. But it's interesting to have the interpretation that he had, because I think dreams, like even in Greek stories, there are people who have a dream and it inspires them to go and do something. But to have the literal interpretation of a dream to the point where it saves a clan and it saves the known civilized world, right? That everyone during this massive regional famine can come to a place and receive food, which I'm sure, everyone was bringing trinkets too in order to, which, filled Egypt's coffers all the more. So Egypt profits from the labor and from the interpretation. Maybe Pharaoh saw that down the road too at the point, but the fact that Pharaoh perceives him as a person that should be in charge of all that stuff, that's amazing.
Yeah.
To go from the guy who just irritated the life out of his brothers to the guy responsible for a house, and they're in turn responsible for the civilized world at that point. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And to stay just as positive to the end. It's incredible. Yeah. So yeah, really amazing person to include in the whole story lineage.
Yeah. He gets, because he's takes up a lot of the Old Testament, or a lot of Genesis, and because the story's so, we've talked about this before with other people, with other stories, but a story just kind of becomes and like an archetype. It's just kind of like, oh, it's Joseph. That's right. Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? It's, just kind of becomes this kind of thing. And to really pick it apart and and to look at not only his faithfulness and positivity all the way throughout, but then also his ability to, I think the thing you said about the interpretation, like that's, there's a lot of people have a lot of dreams, but how much interpretation comes out of it and actual action from it. And that's the hinge on the whole story. Isn't the dreams, it's the interpretation. It's that God does something through Joseph's life, and then Joseph takes that and administrates it, to the point where he saves, you're right, that and at that point, the civilized world, through just, this kind of hinge pin place where he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. It's an incredible thought, to see just kind of how he moves through and doesn't, again, I mean, I could be placing my own thoughts on this, but he just doesn't seem, as he talks, even to the end, which I didn't mention, we talked about today, but he just doesn't seem fazed by any of it. Like, just like, that's, and I made the comment that I don't think it mattered to Joseph whether he was in a pit or a palace. And I enjoyed the palace more, but it just feels like, as you read, I'm like, it just feels like he's like, no matter where he is, he's like, no, I'll just do the best I can.
He uses both places the same way.
Right, exactly right. It doesn't matter where he was. He did the exact same things, and at the end of it, he saves the civilized world. Yeah, you're right. That his pattern doesn't change all the way throughout.
No, and that's another strange and interesting part to me, because again, last of a set of brothers and sisters, didn't they go through the same child rearing that he went through? I mean. Those of us with multiple children, you and I both, right? What you do on your first child is a little different than what you do on the last child, right? The first child, everybody's super safe and clean and kind and careful. Right? And last child, you're like, they got a diaper on, right? So the rules are a little looser.
Survived another day. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That one lived. Woo, right. So, I mean, maybe not quite that loose, but in any case, it's interesting that they all didn't come through with a similar perspective or an understanding that our brother Joseph, he's got this insight.
Yeah,
but instead they reject it because it's so agitating.
It's only in a family. Only
exactly.
You reject the thing that ends up saving Egypt.
It's amazing. Amazing. Yeah, that's a really, when you look at this from the perspective of living at that time, what it must have been like and who the people were, it's a much richer story, and just really strange to imagine that no matter what, right, how many of us, who among us, even if you go forward in the Bible a little bit further and look at the book of Job, right, righteous man after God's own heart, just about, still whines and complains a little bit. I mean, good reason, lots of good reasons.
Fair.
Lots of good reasons, but you don't hear that from Joseph. It doesn't happen. He's like, what? Here I am in this way. I guess I'm moving forward this way. This is the way. This is my ride.
He's adaptable based on God's faithfulness in his life. It's and you're right. It's almost unseen elsewhere. Like there's just you know, Job, for everything that Job does to maintain righteousness, he still gets a little whiny, which again, agreed, I would too. But Joseph just doesn't, no matter, he's so adaptable, so flexible based on, he's just like, well, God will use this, I'll be fine, you know, and
Yeah.
just like everything he says is all the way through. So it is when you slow down. Again, I think what I'm getting from these even these conversations, our conversations, is when you slow down and really look at a character beyond kind of your whatever assumptions have been created about that character through just kind of life of knowing the Bible. Man, all this stuff just begins to kind of crack open. It's just wonderful to think about the biblical world where they're living and what's going on and what they're assuming and what's happening versus not happening. And then you get, you know, you see Joseph and just kind of this, even though the story remains the same, you see him in this kind of new perspective of just how he just maintained. He adapted and he maintained all the way through.
And he
To the point
trusted
his
that
last
God had a
words were-
plan, right?
Right.
God had a plan for his life and was going to bring him to the end that he had in mind for him, and he knew it was going to be good because of the dreams that agitated his family. Those are the only ones that they write down anyway. He knew that those were going to be he was going to end up in an important role, and he just trusted that it was going to happen. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. I'm just going to keep riding along until it shows up.
Whether he's in a pit or a palace, just to use those words again. I mean, it doesn't you're right. Maybe it just doesn't matter to, you know, because
getting carted along as a slave, getting thrown in prison. It's just the stepping stone to the next level. That unstoppable, unsinkable. Like I said, amazing.
That's a great word. That's a great word for him, unsinkable. So, and a great place to stop because I know it's time you got a meeting.
Yes, sir.
But that's a great way to bookend that one. Go to unsinkable to unsinkable. All right, so we will see what happens in Joseph Part 2, but then you and I will meet back together, and it'll be a new series. I can send that to you if you want, but it's about relationships. So it's a topical series on relationships called "What's in the Middle." I figured it's a good time for us to talk about relationships just generally. So anyway, thanks for doing this again, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks.
Excellent. Episode 11 in the books.
What's that?
Episode 11.
Episode 11 in the books. Man, we're cooking.
Double ones. There we go.
All right, see you later. Thanks, Kirk.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.